Hello, my name is Brant Hunt, and my channel is called Discerning What is True. Today is the Saturday, that is, the 29th, I think it is, the 29th day, I think it is, of January 2024. Going to be reading from another piece of work that actually a chapter here in what we call Gerald Massey's works, Luniolatry, Ancient and Modern. Um, Again, this is from the part of Gerald Massey's lectures, all condensed in one book. So these were lectures he gave, I gather, to an audience where he spoke at in the past, which would probably be in the uh, probably the 1880s, 1870s, so to speak. So this guy is renowned, and that is for looking at mythology and other areas of what has been hidden from us for thousands of years, it seems to be. So let's get into the work here. Thank you for being here. And let's see, we got to do something here quickly. So the title again is Luniolatry, Ancient and Modern. For 30 years past, Professor Max Muller has been teaching in his books and lectures in the Times and Saturday Review and various magazines from the platform of the Royal Institution, the pulpit of Westminster Abbey, and his chair as at Oxford. That is, that mythology is a disease of language, and that the ancient symbolism was a result of something like a primitive mental aberration. Quote, we know, end quote, says Renal, echoing Max Muller in his Hibbert, Hibbert lectures, quote, we know that mythology is a defense which springs up at a peculiar stage of human culture, end quote. Such is the shallow explanation of the non-evolutionists, and such explanation are still accepted by the British public that gets its thinking done for it by proxy. Professor Max Muller, uh, Cox, and Gubernos, and other propounders of the solar mythologies or solar mythologies have portrayed the primitive myth makers for us as a sort of a Germanized Hindu metaphysical, projecting his own shadow of a mental myth and talking ingeniously concerning smoke, or at least cloud, the sky overhead becoming like the dome of dreamland, or scribbled over with the imaginary of Aborigine nightmares. They conceived the early man in their own likeness and looked upon him as perversely prone to self-mystification, or as Fontanella has it, quote, subject to beholding things that are not there, end quote. They have misrepresented primitive or archaic man as having been ideology, sorry about that, misled from the first by active but untutored imagination into believing all sorts of fallacies, which were directly and constantly contradicted by his own daily experience. A fool of fancy in the midst of these grim readings or grim realities, they were grinding his experience into him, like the grinding icebergs making their imprints upon the rocks submerged beneath the sea. It remains to be said, and will one day be acknowledged, that these accepted teachers have been no nearer to the beginning of mythology and language than Burns, B-U-R-N, poet called Willie, had been near to Pegasus. My reply is, quote, tis but a dream of the metaphysical theorist that mythology was a disease of language, or anything else accepted in his own brain. The origin and meaning of mythology have been missed altogether by these solennities and weathermongers. Mythology was a primitive mode of thinking, the early thought. It was founded on natural facts and is still verifiable in phenomenon. There's nothing insane, nothing irrational in it. When considered in the light of evolution and when it mode of expression by sign language is thoroughly understood. The insanity lies in mistaking it for human history or divine revelation. Mythology is the repository of man's most ancient science, and what concerns us chiefly is this. When truly interpreted once more, it is destined to be the death of those false theologies to which it has unwittingly given birth. In modern phraseology, a statement is sometimes said to be mythical in proportion to its being untrue. But the ancient mythology was not a system or mode of falsifying in that sense. Its fables were the means of conveying facts. They were neither forgeries nor fictions, nor did mythology originate in any intentional double dealing whatever. Although it did assume an aspect of duality when direct expressions in words had succeeded the primitive mode of representation by means of things as signs and symbols. For example, when the Egyptians portrayed the moon as a cat, they were not ignorant enough to suppose that the moon was a cat, nor did they wandering fancy see any likeness in the moon to a cat. Nor was a cat myth any mere expansion of verbal metaphor. Nor had they any intentions of making puzzles or riddles to mislead others by means of such enigmatic sign language, or at a time when they could not help themselves, having no choice in the matter. They had observed the simple fact that the cat saw in the dark, and that her eyes became full orbed and grew most luminous by night. The moon was the seer by night in heaven, and the cat was his equivalent on the earth. And so the familiar cat was adopted as a representative, a natural sign, a living pictograph of the lunar orb, where we should make a comparison and say the moon saw in the dark like a cat, or the cat saw like the moon by night. They identified the one with the other, that is, a mode, a metaphor which still characterizes the great style in poetry, and said the cat up there can see by night. And so it followed that the sun, which saw down in the underworld at night, could also be called the cat as it was, because it also saw in the dark. The name of the cat in Egyptian is Mu, M-A-U, which denotes the seer, from Ma, from Mu, to see. One writer on mythology asserts that the Egyptians, quote, imagine a great cat behind the sun, which is the pupil of the cat's eye, end quote. But this imagining is all modern. It is the Mullerite stock and trade. The moon as cat was the eye of the sun, because it reflected the solar light, and because the eye gives back the image in its mirror. In the form of a goddess Pash, the cat keeps watch for the sun, with her paw holding down and bruising the head of the serpent of the darkness, calling his eternal enemy. The cat was the eye of night in the same symbolical sense that our daisy, which opens and shuts when the rising and setting of the sun, is called the eye of day. Moreover, the cat saw the sun, had it in his eye by night when it was otherwise unseen by men. We might say that the moon mirrored the solar light because we have looking glasses. With them, the cat's eye was the mirror. The hare, HRE, was another type of the eye that opened in heaven and saw in the dark. Consequently, we find that the hare in the moon is a myth that gives birth to a common and widespread superstition. In later times, the symbol is literalized and is supposed that primitive man were always on the lookout for likeness, like a youthful poet in search of comparisons, and that they saw some resemblance to the form of a hare in the dark, HRE, shadow of the lunar orb. Whereas in mythology, things are not what they seem to be. And it seems like anybody, that would lead to no consensus of agreement nor establish any science of knowledge. A learned man once remarked to me on the strange fact that the ancients should have selected the least observable of all the planets, that is Mercury, to make so much of as the messenger. He was entirely ignorant of the fact that mythology includes a system of timekeeping, and that Mercury was made the planetary messenger, in addition to his lunar character, because his revolution around the sun is performed in the shortest space of planetary time by like matter. Max Muller will tell you that the moon was called by the name of Saska, that is in Sanskrit, from Sasa, the hare, because the common people in India think the black marks in the moon looks like a hare, Hare. But this is mere fool's work of child's play with the surface appearance of things which has little or no relations to true myth um, or ancient symbolism, and all such interpretations entirely misleading. Egypt, as I contend, has left us the means of determining the original nature and significance of these types. When the Egyptians would denote a opening, says or Apollos, they delineated a hare because this animal always had its eyes open. The name of the hare in Egyptian is Un, Un, which signifies open to open, the opener, especially connected with periodically. I lost my space here. Hold on a second. Anyway, back to the thing here. The hare is a hieroglyphic sign of the opener, which and we forgot that word. The hare is a special symbol of the god Osiris in the character of Un-Niffer, the good opener, and later phrased the good revealer. It is as the seer that both hare and cat are associated with the witch as types of abnormal seership. The hare also denotes the opening time as the period of puberty, when it was lawful for the sexes to come together. Hence, it was the type of bureaucracy and legality in the human phase. For this reason, the use among the Nabokwa, the Hottentots, are or were not allowed to eat the hare. When the Chinese, with the Chinese, the rabbit takes the place of the hare as a lunar type. Its period of gestation being 30 days. That would make it appropriately representative of the illumination, of opening anew, and of rebirth. The Salish Indians have a myth of the frog and the moon. They tell how the wolf, in love with the frog, was pursuing her by night when she leaped into the moon and escaped. Among us, the superstitions of our English folklore, we also have one respecting the frog or toad that is supposed to be visible in the moon. Now it can be shown how the frog got deposited there, but only as a type, not in reality, not as a mere appearance. The frog is a natural transformer from the tadpole phase in the water to the four-legged stage on land. The moon likewise transforms, and the metamorphosis of the lunar orb could be typified by the change in the frog. And so the frog is a picture object, natural type, and living demonstrator for the moon, ultimately became the frog in the moon. The moon rose up monthly from the celestial waters, renewed like the frog, and as the horned one grew fuller bed, it might be thought of as losing the tail of the tadpole connection. The frog was figured as the head of the Egyptian goddess Heka, Greek Hekan, Hetate, the consort of Khnep, one of whose title is the king of frogs. Heka, being a lunar goddess, and Kup, a solar god. This title would denote that he was lord of the numerous transformations of light in the moon, described as being the father and she as the mother of frogs, because the frog was the typical transformer as representative of the moon. The Chinese have a three-legged frog in the moon that was an ancient beauty called named Chan Go, who lives there because she once drank the mirta of immortality. I have elsewhere suggested that The original Fige of Greece was a form of the frog goddess who transformed. The name of Fige denotes the frog and is the most famous statue of her, carved by Apelles. She was portrayed as Venus transfiguring from the form, as did the frog goddess Hekar of Egypt, who was the frog in the moon. Only being reading these types, which precede letters, can we at all understand the thought and intentions of the primitive thinkers or thinkers. Another example is the dung beetle in Egypt was a type of Ka, the creator by transformation, who is said to have been begotten by his own becoming and to have been born without a mother through repetition of himself. Clef, the root of his name, signifies to transform. External nature was the scene of eternal transformation and never-ending metaphorism. And it had been observed that Clef, that is, the beetle, was likewise a transformer, inasmuch as it laid its eggs in dung found on the banks of the Nile, rolled it up into the ball, and buried itself deep in the dry sand along with its seed, where qua beetle it transformed the old beetle into the young one, and so continued as the same beetle by transformation. Thus the beetle served to typify that being or existence which could not be expressed, but which was seen to continue forever by self-repetition and phenomenal manifestation. They knew nothing of beginning, and did not pretend to know, but only of becoming, and of repetition or renewed coming of itself. So the beetle was adopted as a type of transformation, whether of the old moon into the new one, of the sun out of the lower into the upper heaven, or in the latter times, of the dead mummy into a living soul. Or Apollo says the scar beetle deposits his ball of seed in the earth for the space of 28 days, the length of time during which the moon passes through the 12 signs of the zodiac, and on the 29th day it opens the ball. The day on which the conjunction of sun and moon occur was the day of resurrection for the new life. The beetle in heaven has once more transformed, and there was another new moon. The orb of the moon, which changes night after night, is drawn longer even than any performed by the Chinese nowadays, and drops scene of the darkness at the end and the transformation to the new life of light in the beginning, presented the earliest form of the primitive theater, which offered its celestial show in heaven, glorious to all eyes that gaze up from above. This must have been one of the earliest educators in natural phenomenon. There's nothing more interesting to me than to watch the nascent mind of man making its infantile clutch and trying to catch on and lay hold of eternal things, to lay hold, as it were, of the skirts of the passing powers that were held to be superior to itself, nothing more instructive than to follow the primitive ways of keeping touch with the life of external nature, and of sharing in the operation going on, so as to be on the not right and safe side and get on the true line for deriving some benefit from the way in which things were seen to be going. This is very touching in its simplicity, and will teach us more concerning the past of man than all the metaphysical interpretations hitherto attempted. The proper time for prayer, wishing or invoking aid, was at first sight of the new moon, just as it started visibly on the way to the fulfillment. The mental attitude being, quote, "May my wish be fulfilled like the light in thy orb, O moon. May my life be renewed like the light," end quote. Such was the prayer of the Congo Negroes, the first moon being the mother moon, the eye that mirrored or reproduced the light of the sun, that will account the day of the full moon being accounted, as it was by the Greeks, the Britons, and others, the most propitious time for the marriage ceremony. The full moon was held to be come forth great with good luck. Boy, as children ought to be weaned when the horn moon was waxing, and girls when it was on the wane, the female being the reproducer as bringer forth. So peas and beans were sown in the wane of the moon to rise again like the moon renewed. Corn ought to be cut during the wane of the moon if you would have them disappear quickly. In a very simple way, the primitive observers had tried to set their life and time with the life going on around them, and thus get what light they could from nature for their own guidance, and also make her language their own. But their asses, quote, in Hudi Bros, quote, why on a sign no painter draws? The full moon even ever has the sorry, ever but the half. Now that is a very good sign language, especially as the half moon in a public house symbol. It was an invitation to eat and drink to the full, or come to the full at the half moon does. It may be to get fur in the Scottish sense. A moon already full would not have answered the purpose. An eclipse projected the shadow of coming calamity. The renewed light of the old moon was like a promise of eternal life and everlasting youth. When personified, this was the healer, the savior, and an image of varied life, the firstborn from the dead, the first fruits of them that slept in the graveyard of sunken suns and cemetery of old dead moons, was reproduced visibly in external phenomenon, as the new moon, which was personated by the male moon god Thoth, called the Eight and Lord of the Eight of the Earth region, as the place of rising again from the dead in the orb of the moon. There was a lunar mythology extant long before it was known that the lunar orb was a reflector of the solar light. There was a time also when it was not known and could not be divined that the moon which dwindled and died down visibly was the same moon that rose again from the dead. Hence, there was two different messages conveyed from heaven to men on earth by the hare as messenger for the moon in the lunar myths of the Hottentots and other primitive races. In one of these versions, the moon declared that as it died and did not rise again from its grave, even so was it with man, who went down to the earth and came back no more. But when it had made out that the same moon returned as the old orb renewed, the nature of the revelation was reversed. The messages now contain a doctrine of resurrection from the dead for man as well as moon. The re-arising and transforming orb at least proclaimed that even as it did not, the orb did not die out altogether, but was renewed from some hidden spring or source of light. So was it with the human race, who were likewise renewed to relive on hereafter like the moon. In a myth of the Caroline Islands, it is said that the first men only quit this life on the last day of the dying moon to be revivified when the new moon appeared. But there was a dark spirit that inflicted a death from which there was no revival. This dark spirit, with its fatal message, was primary, in fact, and the true assurance of survival, like the moon, depended on it being identified as the same moon which rose again. It is in this way that we can rethink the primitive thought by getting it rethinking in the physical reality of natural phenomenon. In the UTE mythos, the task of making a moon was assigned to Whippoorwill, a god of the night. Actually, it's a bird, but anyway, I understand it's the one that makes the noises at night. The frog offered himself as a willing sacrifice for this purpose, and he was transformed by magical incarnation into the new moon. The symbolism is identical whether denied, derived from Egypt or not, so as it were with the Buddha offered his body as a sacrifice and transformed himself to a lunar hare. The Maoris have a tradition of the first children of Earth in which they relate that the earliest subject of human thought was the difference between light and darkness. They were always thinking what might be the difference between light and darkness. Naturally, the primary condition of existence observed by primitive man, primitive men were those that were most observable and foremost among them, where the phenomena of the day and the dark, which follow each other in ceaseless change. Mythology begins with this vague and merely elementary phase of eternal phenomenon, um, alternating in night and day. In a secondary stage, it was observed that the battlefield of this never-ending warfare of day and dark was focused and brought to definite point in the orb of the moon, where the struggle between the two personified powers of light and darkness went on forever, each power having its triumph over the other in its turn. These being depicted in our representation as the solar light and the serpent of darkness, in another by the lion and the unicorn. These phenomena of light and darkness were at first set forth by means of animals, reptiles, birds, and other primitive types of the elementary powers. And lastly, the human type was adopted, and the cunning of the crocodile, or the jackal of darkness, is represented by the Egyptian Sut, the Norse Loki, the Greek Hermes, or the Jewish Jacob, the dark deceiver. And today we find that the Christian Evidence Society engaged in defending such characters as that of Jacob in the full and perfect belief that Jacob was a human being and one of God's chosen race, whereas he was no more a person than was the Suanop in Egypt or Renar, the fox in Europe. The human form, like that of the earlier animal types, was only representative of some power manifested in natural phenomenon. This mode of representation was known when these sacred stories were first told of mythical characters. It was afterwards continued and taught in the so-called mysteries by means of the gnosis. When the art of gnosis was lost to the world that is outside, the ancient historians were ignorantly supposed to be human in their origin. Mythology was euphemized, I should say. That is, the idea was mistaken for the real. And Egyptian mythology was converted into Hebrew miracles and Christian history. Thus, when certain Indians claimed that the first ancestors of the red men were red man was a hare. We do not know what that saying means until we learn the represented value of the symbol. So it is all sign writing, though. When Herodias went to Egypt, he recognized the originals of the gods that were adored, amplified and embellished, or laughed at it in Greece. At present, however, the Monorites dare not mention Egypt, but look at Ascendant as those who do. Here is a crucial instance of survival, evidenced by philology. The name of man as Ares, A-R-E-S, will serve to prove how Egyptian underlies the Greek. The planet Mars is called Hartesh in Egyptian, which signifies the Red Lord or the Lord of Gore. Septuagint, this writes the name of Ares as Hartos, and Vesavalent as whence Hartus, and finally Eretz. Again, the name of Hera denotes the heaven over in Egyptian, which certain describes the nature of the Greek goddess of that name. When we are told by the Roman Catholic Egyptologists that call renowned that neither, quote, that neither Hebrews nor Greeks borrowed any of their ideas from Egypt, end quote. You can only think of such a dictum as an intentional blind or as a result of putting up the glass to an eye that cannot see. It is simply impossible for the non-evolutionist, the bigoted Bibliator, or the Motherite to interpret it or to understand the mythology of Egypt. Its roots go deep and its branches spread too far for the range of thought. And now let me offer a remarkable example of the modes in which the Egyptians expressed or tingled their thoughts by means of external phenomena. The sun god Ra is represented as possessing 14 spirits or Kaus, K-A-U-S, the living likeness and glorified image of himself. These are portrayed as 14 personages as Efu and Dendera. In one text it is said, quote, "Hail to thee and thy 14 spirits 14 times," end quote. These are also mentioned in the tablets of Istanbul at the 14 chorus of Ra, which, end quote, quote, Ta has added to all his ways, end quote. Ta is the moon god, and this gives us a clue to his 14 spirits, which I think no Egyptologist has yet suspected. But Ta is the god of the first 14 days of the moon's lunation, and 14 nights of the new moon reproduce the likeness of the solar god in light 14 times over. These are designated as apparitons seen nightly in the moon. Indeed, the moon in its dark hour was treated as the mummy or unilluminated body of the sun god, who is described as coming to visit, to comfort it, to beget upon it in the underworld. This lunar body of the solar soul is represented by the ass-headed god, Anna, Aai, upon which the sun god rode, who is found mummified on the tomb of Ramses VI. Thus, the dark orb or body of the moon was the mummy of the sun, and its 14 days of growing light were thought of as a 14 manifestations of the solar god in spiritual apparition. Visible by night and the moon, hence it will be seen how natural it was that the lunar orb should be looked up to the home of the spirits, as when the Egyptian prays that his soul may ascend to heaven in the disk of the moon. Another fable of the dark half of the lunation has been preserved by Plutarch, who relates that when Typhon, the evil power, was hunting by moonlight, he by chance came upon the dead body or mummy of Osiris, prepared for burial, and knowing again, he tore it into 14 parts and scattered them all about. These 14 parts typify the 14 days of the lessening light, during which the devil of darkness had the upper hand. The 28 days made one lunar month, according to the Egyptian reckoning, I should say. The earlier and simpler representation of the lunar light and dark is portrayed in the myth of the two brothers, who always contend for supremacy over each other. The more ancient and primitive myths are found to be the most universal, and this of the twin brothers is extant of all over the world. It is the myth of Suthartis in Egypt, the Asins or Krishnas of Balarama in India, I should say, the crow and the eagle of the Australian blacks, the Tumcombe and the Guamnet among the Hottentots, Jack and Jill and 20 other forms that I have compared in my Natural Genesis. It is that struggle of two brothers in the beginning, which is represented as the Hebrew book of Genesis as the murderous conflict of Cain and Abel. Cain as the victor in the same character to the Egyptian Krumis. Krum or Klum, meaning to choose or chase, I should say, hunt or beat, be the victor, and therefore I take it that the name of Cain is probably one with the Egyptian Klum. Abel is the dark little one that fades and falls and passes away, the one who becomes a sacrificial type. Because of the nature of the phenomenon, the conqueror is portrayed as the killer. The Gnostic Canaanites, however, maintain truly that Cain derived his being from the power above and not from the evil power below. They knew the mythos. The contention of Jacob and Esau for birth and for the birthright is another form of the same myth. Esau, the red and hairy, is really the lord of light and the new moon. Jacob is the child of darkness, hence the deceiver by nature and by name. As a Jewish tradition relates that Esau, when born, had the likeness of a serpent marked upon his head or his heel. This shows he was a personification of the hero who bruised the serpent's head, and that Jacob, who laid hold of Esau's heel, was a co-type and phenomenon with the serpent of darkness. There is nothing moral or immoral in mere physical phenomena themselves. No fratricide is actually committed by the conquering Cain, nor fraud by the dark and willy Jacob. But when these same phenomena are dramatized and the characters are made human or inhuman, as the case may be, the unmoral becomes immoral, and the human image is disfigured by the most willful flaw or wandered brand of degradation. Cain is made the murderer of his own brother in the beginning, and that red stain is supposed to run through all of human history. as a first result of Adam's fall, and to be burned on the brow of man until it is washed out as last in the blood of redeeming Savior, who is equally mythical. This lunar representation has several shapes of Egyptian mythology, where the twin brothers are Sut and Osiris, and Sut and Horus. The two Horuses, Tot and An, are Khonsu and Typhon. In the Hilbert lectures, Mr. Renal says curtly, the Egyptian god Khonshu is the moon. Quote, but such Egyptology has not yet blazed the various surface of the mythology. Such statements teach nothing truly because they do not put in the bottom facts. They do not help us to think in those phenomena which have been entitled or divinized in as mythology. It may be said quite as bluntly that Khonshu is not the moon. He only represents one phase of the lunar phenomenon, which was triadic. Khonshu is the child of the sun and moon. His name denotes the young hero. When this deity was involved, it had been discovered that the moon derived her light from the sun. In the planisphere of Dentra Dara, the young youthful god Khonshu is portrayed in the disk of the full moon at Easter, where he represents the light and force of the sun that is reborn monthly and annually of the lunar orb, considered to be his mother, who thus reproduces the child of light in the disk of the moon. The same myth is likewise Osiran, as we learn from one of the hymns, where it is said, "Hail to thee, Osiris, Lord of eternity. When thou art in heaven, thou appearest as the sun, and thou renews itself as the moon." End quote. But this renewed of light in the moon was portrayed as a rebirth of the god in the person of his own child. Hence, the child Horus is also to be like the child Khonshu in the disk of the full moon, as both may be seen in the same planisphere of Dentra Tara and Khonshu in the Egyptian Jack, the giant killer. In the ritual, he is called the slayer of rebels and piercer of the proud. His natural genesis was in the tiny light of the new moon, which rose up with his sharp horns to pierce the powers of night and drive them out of darkening orb. The giants of the primitive mind were the powers of darkness, which forever rose up in revolt against the light, kept all life cowering in the shadow by night, took possession of the moon and the latter half of the lunation, or covered the face with the blood and dust of battle during the terrible time of eclipse. Then the little hero, that is the child of light, arose and made war on the giants, and overcame them as he grew in glory and waxed greatly in the plenitude of his hidden father's power and might. The name of Khonshu's father is Amen, or Amen, the hidden god, the child Khonshu being the visible representative reborn in the new moon. Mythology is a groundwork of all our theology and Christology, and it's only by mastering the plan that we can learn how the superstructure has been built. This character of Khonshu is that of the mythical Messiah, or manifester in eternal nature, as a representative of the eternal in the phenomenon of time. In Egypt, Sepchronos, or time, was designated the true Rapha, or heir apparent to the father. Osiris, or Amon Ra, and the rebirth in time might be monthly or annually, every 19 or 25, 500, or 2155 years, according to the particular period. In the mystical or spiritual phase, this representative of divinity was the Christ within, the Son of God incarnated in matter, the Christ of the Gnostics, who was not a man, their Jesus, who could not be a Jew, their Redeemer, who was but the immortal Prince, a deliverer from the degradation, a Savior solely from the desolation of matter, which the Greek poet Lydius calls the, quote, giver of all shameful things, end quote. But to return to the moon mythos, the legend of Samson can now be read for the first time as a Hebrew version of the Egyptian myth of Khunsu, the lunar solar hero who slays the giants or Philistines and overcomes the powers of darkness. It was impossible to read the riddle by supposing, which Stein thought, that is the guy, that Samson was simply the sun god himself, because if he were, in killing the lion, he would be only slaying the reflection of himself, the lion being a solar type. The name of Shimshon denotes the luminous or shining one as the imagination of the solar fire. Samson, like Khunsu, is the typical hero. Khunsu is the Egyptian Hercules. Samson, like Hercules, slays the lion as his first great labor or feat of strength. This deed is represented allegorically and is put forth as his riddle. Out of the eater came forth meat, and out of the mighty came forth sweetness. The mighty one who devours is the lion, and the honey was found in its dead carcass. Mythologic and Egyptian monuments will enable us to read the riddle. In the Persian, we see the lion depleted with a bee in its mouth. The lion, or rather the lioness, was an Egyptian figure of fire. The lioness in heat. She was represented by the goddess of the solar fire and alcoholic spirit as Sethet, who carried the sun disk on the head of a lioness. The name of this she-lion is called Sether. It's also the name for the bee, which is the royal symbol of Lower Egypt, and the bee denotes the sweetness in the lion. Now, the furious solar heat was considered with the waters of the inundation, 2/3 of which, according to Hor Apollo, poured down into Egypt while the sun was in the sign of the lion. Sekher was also the goddess of sweetness or pleasure. We may say literally goddess of the honeymoon. Hence the association of the lion and the bee, or the honey and the lion. The triumph over the lion may be understood in this way. Sether, the she-lion, impersonated the force of the sun, which was often fatal. Hence she was made the punisher of the wicked with hell fire, and this lunar hero as Hercules. Khunsu, or Samson, was the conqueror in the cool of the night, which followed the fiery fervor of the sun by day. Further, at the time the sun was in the lion sign, the full moon rose vis-a-vis in the sign of the waterman, or water woman, in the Hermetic zodiac. And we cannot read one part of the celestial imagery independently of the other. In this full moon, which brought the sweet fresh waters into Egypt, the hero attained the height of his glory as conqueror of the furnace heat, which culminated then, and there was the sun in the sign of the lioness as reflector of the fiercest solar fire, as the moon was the bringer of the waters and the breath of life and the coolness and the dews of night. The lunar hero was not only credited with drawing the sting of Sethead, but with extracting honey from the dead lion. When the young hero, as son of the sun god, reborn the new moon, has once more conquered in conflict with his eternal enemy, and he breaks out in triumph, free from the thralling foes of the dragon, of the Samai, or the Philistines. As he ascends aloft, he is seen bearing the dark orb of the old moon as a palpable proof of his power. He has burst through the barriers of the underworld, the gates of death and darkness, and so it would be fabled that he carried the barriers away with him and bore them visibly on high to the summit of the lunar ascent. It is so represented with Samson not only breaks out of Gaza, but tears up the city gates and carries them away by night with their posts, bolts, and bars to the top of the hill, or mountain of the moon, as the lunar height was called. The solar lunar nature of the hero is shown by the number 30, the 30 days to the month, in the solar lunar reckoning. Samson has 30 companions. He spoke 30 men at Ascalon and spoiled them at 30 changes of raiment. The number 7 is also all important factor in the lunar mythos. With its 28 days to the moon in the cruciform legend of Ishtar, the goddess descent and ascend through 7 gates each way in her passages to and from the netherworld. As female representative of the moon, so when Sut Typhon, the dark one of the lunar twins, was beaten by Horus, he is described by Plutarch as fleeing from the battle during 7 days on the back of an ass. In each case, the number 7 signifies 1/4 of a moon. The number 7 answering to 1 lunar quarter is prominent in the legend of Samson. In one phrase, he tells Delilah that if he's bound with 7 new bow strings, his strength will depart, and he will become weak and be as another man. But when these are applied to him, they're snapped like a string of fire sing tow. We may suppose this phase to represent the first 7 days of the growing crescent moon, hence the 7 new bow strings, which are in keeping with the 7 strings of the lunar harp. In the second phase, the hero is bound with new ropes, which he freed himself from as they had been threaded. 14 days bringing us to the moon is full and the culmination of Samson's glory. Then he confesses to his charmer that if the 7 locks of his head are shaven off, his strength will surely depart. Now, hair is a special primitive types of virility, potency, and power. I'm going to take a break, folks. I'm a little tired. We're going to stop here. I'll do this to finish this off probably tomorrow, and we'll go from there. It's getting late here. So thank you for being here. Again, like I said, this is probably half of the chapter here, so we'll read the rest of it tomorrow. Thank you, and have a good night, and take care.